All right, race fans, welcome back to another edition of Stafford Speedway Shop Tours. Today, we go away from visiting drivers. It's time to visit one of the chassis builders that competes at Stafford Motor Speedway, and Barry Fluckiger. Hey, Barry. How are you?
Nice to have you.
Well, thanks for having us. We appreciate it. You got a pretty wild space here and a lot of things going on. Why don't you show us around a little bit?
All right. Well, first of all, I'm building Cliff Saunders a new car, and that's what I've been doing this winter, and it's been taking up quite a bit of my time. Once I fit the body and finish the firewall tin, the car will go to paint. I started from the ground up with this car. This is actually a 79 Monte Carlo chassis. A lot of people, what they don't realize is these cars, they start with an actual chassis that is built from GM. This particular chassis is a 1979 Monte Carlo. I started with it on my jig, and I bent every roll bar and welded every roll bar and fabricated the interior firewall tin.
This chassis itself, though, this is a street chassis that you would have found in, what, a 79 Monte Carlo. Correct. But what are some of the other chassis, or at least the frame rails, that we'll see competing at Stafford?
Well, this chassis is the same right through 88. It fits pretty much the same platform that GM used for all those years.
I'm looking down here at the cross member. It looks like you've done a little bit of work in there as well. And as I understand it, that's to help modify the oil pan for some of the crate engines, so that way it provides a little space for that.
Absolutely. I did have to lower that so the engine can sit in there. The oil pan on that engine is a little bit bigger than, say, a stock oil pan. It holds 8 quarts of oil. And so I had to actually cut that out, the cross member, and lower it. And as well as the fuel pump, because we run a much bigger fuel pump than a stock engine did.
Now, this particular chassis, we talked about it starting off on the frame, but you built this in-house. This is a ground-up build for you. What's a piece of equipment that you use to do that?
Well, the piece of equipment that I built this car on is my jig right here. This is a jig that fits this chassis that I made. I started, this was actually a jig that somebody else was using that I bought, that I just used the I-beams. I made fixtures so I could reproduce how a car was.
So now, what do you have going here, Barry? Because this is another jig that you're using to help get cars repaired for the racetrack. What is this, and how do you use it?
Well, this is a frame machine. Not many chassis guys actually have a frame machine. In the collision field, we always would take a car that was hit really hard and actually pre-pull it before we replace the parts to relieve stress.
So explain that for somebody who doesn't really understand. You get a car that comes in, it's hit the wall on the front end, for example, so the front frame rails that we talked about on your new car bent up a little bit. You go ahead and take that car and you mount it based on these brackets here.
Correct. So this is a unibody system, which I actually adapt to pull race car frames. And I use these clamping systems. What I do is I attach on the side of the frame rails of, like that car per se, a piece of metal that will come down and attach into these. So I'll actually drop the race car onto these clamps and tie it down. And then in addition, I will use some chains to hold it down to this, so when I'm actually pulling, it won't move.
You have your frame here, your car's on it, it's chained down. Now you've got these two devices here. How do you use them to straighten a chassis out?
Well, these are 10,000 pound rams. They apply pulling pressure by that pedal over there. This pedal is hydraulic. These are hydraulic pistons. The air goes to it. I step on that pedal and it makes these towers move in and out, and I attach the chain to the part that I want to pull. I step on the pedal and it actually puts 10,000 pounds of pressure on the car to pull the race car back into shape.
Tell me a little bit about your philosophy when it comes to straightening cars, because in the infield, oftentimes I see guys, they get wrecked, they're frustrated, they're tossing parts and pieces apart of their race car. But you were telling me a little bit earlier off camera that your strategy is that you'd rather have all the pieces in place when the car comes into your shop.
I prefer the car to come here exactly the way it was hit, without anything taken off, without any roll bars taken off. And the reason that is because when the car was hit at the track, all the roll bars are connected to the chassis. It's generally hit on a bumper or one of the roll bars, and all those roll bars move together, and it allows the chassis to move and roll back, and that's how I want to pull everything back out. So when I apply pressure with my chains, I can pull everything back in the same shape. But when they cut it apart, I have two different parts that need to be pulled back together, and it's very hard to get those to come back at the same sequence without the roll bars.
That's enough for fixing race cars for me. I want to get back to the new stuff and putting this car together for Cliff Saunders. The next step, we got to put this nose piece on. Let's go ahead and do that.
Yeah, because this thing's got to get ready for paint.
You don't want to see me paint a race car, I can tell you that. All right, tell me about this, because you make the transition from being a race car driver in the dare stock division all of a sudden to being a very successful chassis builder. How did you get from A to B?
I did collision work for almost 30 years, and was in the third generation in the collision field. My grandfather was a body man, my father was a body man, and me and my twin brother were both body men. We as a family decided to sell the family business. The owners wanted me to sign a covenant not to compete, and I didn't know what I was going to do. At first, we were going to do this as a hobby, but then I didn't have a career, so I had to figure out what I was going to do for a living. And what else do I know how to do? I've been doing collision work for 30 years. In 2011, Fluckiger Race Chassis was born.
And you've got a couple of championships along the way too. This isn't just a fly-by-night organization. I mean, you've had some success.
My most recent championship was with Al Saunders, the brother, the twin brother that owns this car right here. And hopefully this year, after building this year, maybe we'll win a championship with his twin brother.